Have you ever wondered how much a family of 3 in Vietnam actually spends on food in a single day? Not a rough estimate. The real numbers, meal by meal, from a normal family like mine. I'm Nam, 34 years old, living in Hanoi with my wife and our 5-year-old daughter, my small family of 3. If you watched my last video, you know we just bought a small 70 square meter home with a $114,000 bank loan. Every month, a big part of our income goes toward paying that off. That's why food isn't something we spend on carelessly. Every meal is planned, just good enough to enjoy, just cheap enough to save. Today, I'll walk you through a normal day of eating for my family, and at the end, I'll compare it to exactly one day of my salary, so you get the clearest picture of what life really costs for an average family in Vietnam. My day starts at 6 a.m., and breakfast is my favorite meal. Not because it's fancy, but because it's the only time the whole family sits together before everyone goes their separate ways. My wife usually makes a pot of rice porridge, sometimes a simple homemade noodle soup, or just bread with eggs. Everyday dishes any Vietnamese family can cook cheaply. On average, each of us spends about 50 cents, less than half a dollar, for a full breakfast. My daughter always asks for an extra fried egg, her eyes lighting up every time the yolk is still runny. For all 3 of us, breakfast costs around $1.50 total. After breakfast, I drop my daughter off at school before heading to work. And like many office workers in Hanoi, the first thing I do when I get to the office is stop by my usual coffee stand downstairs for an iced milk coffee. 1 cup costs about $1. Small on its own, but $30 a month if you do the math, which isn't nothing for a family paying off a mortgage. Some mornings I think about quitting the habit and making coffee at home instead, but I still keep it. It's one of the few small moments of the day that's just for me, before 8 hours of work begin. At lunch, I usually eat at the company canteen with my coworkers. A full meal, rice, a meat dish, a vegetable dish, sometimes soup, costs about $1.50. This is the standard price at most office canteens in Hanoi, and for many of us, it's the most practical choice. It saves time, saves money, and still gets you a proper meal to power through the afternoon. The afternoon passes with meetings and the usual routine, and I always look forward to 5 p.m., not just because work is over, but because I know dinner is waiting at home. This is the most important meal of the day for my family. All 3 of us sit together, sometimes joined by my mother-in-law when she visits and helps cook. Dinner usually has 3 or 4 dishes, a soup, a main dish like braised pork or fish, a stir-fried vegetable, and sometimes fruit for dessert. Each person's share costs about $2, more than breakfast or lunch, because this is the meal we put the most care into. For the 3 of us, dinner costs around $6 a day. Add it all up. Family breakfast around $1.50, my coffee $1, my lunch $1.50, and family dinner $6. And my family's total daily food cost comes to about $10. Over a month, that's around $300 for food for a family of 3. And here's the part I think most of you will find interesting. My daily wage as an ordinary office worker is about $500,000, roughly $19. If you put our $10 daily food cost next to my $19 daily wage, that means almost 53% of one day's income goes just to feeding my family, before rent, school fees, utilities, or the monthly mortgage payment. What's left, less than half a day's wage, has to cover everything else, including that $114,000 home loan. That's why, even though each meal sounds cheap on its own, balancing a family's finances here is never as simple as it looks. But there's also something positive in these numbers. Even with a modest income, the cost in Vietnam is manageable enough that an ordinary family like mine can still eat well and eat enough without giving up too much. Vietnam has rich, affordable, accessible food culture, fresh vegetables from local markets, nutritious meat and fish, and home cooking that's still very much a part of everyday life here. Every night, watching my daughter finish rice and drink the last of her soup, I think about my own journey. From a boy from central Vietnam who left home with nothing, to now being able to provide full meals for my family every single day, even while carrying a bank loan and living on wages that barely stretch far enough. Maybe that's the real meaning of having enough, not having a lot of money, but knowing how to balance, appreciating simple home-cooked meals, and knowing that every dollar saved today is building a more stable future for my family tomorrow.
Cái này có bánh ngọt không?
Mẹ đưa cái bát ra để cho em.
Vớt vừa thôi, vớt sang bên này, nói chỗ nào chưa có nước con phải vớt lên chỗ nào.